this groove, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the fifth part of, What If Issei, Rias meets Star Wars. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Bobby F397 on fanfiction.net. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Vader looked over the ship his apprentice had captured alongside the devils. The ship would certainly be useful in future operations. He just had to make sure he could counter any surprises Palpatine had built into the ship. He felt his apprentice approaching from behind and turned to him. "You are troubled," Vader stated without preamble. Issei nodded as he dug into his jacket. "Indeed, Mstr. Tonight has been very eventful." "Yes. I heard of your gauntlet from Eris Gremory and Eris Citri. My sacred gear is only a part of it, Mstr. Oh. What else troubles you, young Hyodio?" "This, Mstr," Issei replied as he pulled out a lightsaber. Vader recognized immediately that it wasn't Issei's lightsaber. The former Sith held out a hand toward Issei, who promptly handed it over. Vader turned it over in his hands before taking a defensive stance and igniting the weapon. An orange-red blade appeared. Vader's eyes narrowed underneath his helmet as he examined the blade. He could already tell the crystal was synthetic, just as his now was. There were no naturally occurring crystals that gave off this color, even if a blade was bled. Besides, he couldn't feel the dark side radiating off the blade like bled crystals usually gave off. He switched the blade off and handed it back to Issei. "Who wielded that blade?" "I didn't catch his name, but he was definitely a Force user. I would go so far as to call him a Dark Jedi, but not beyond that. He was certainly not a Sith." "A Dark Jedi? He must have concealed himself through the Force, but that ability is difficult to maintain in a duel. Perhaps he was using K-Tech meditation. No matter. This presents a problem for us. If Palpatine has one Dark Jedi, he is bound to have others. We must consider that for any of our future endeavors." "Lord Vader," a voice asked into the pair's conversation. Vader glanced at the man who'd spoken, one of the technicians from the Executor. Judging from the headset on his head, he was a communications tech. The man was standing at rigid attention. It didn't hide the man's fear, however, and Vader couldn't blame him. When he'd been Palpatine's SLV, he wasn't the most patient or tolerant of commanders. Many an Imperial officer, such as Captain Nida, Admiral Ozzel, and General Tag, had met their demise for their failures or incompetence. Vader had done his best to distance himself from the man he'd become before Ender. 20 years of being that man, however, left their mark on not only him but most of the men in the Imperial military. The technician's reaction to his presence was a good example of that mark. "Speak, Ensign," Vader commanded. "Transmission for you in the comm room, milord. It's coming from the Fallen's comlink." "Very well. We shall speak later, young Hyodio," Vader remarked as he began walking to the Nubian. Issei bowed his head in acknowledgement while Vader noticed the technician relax his posture. Not enough to break military decorum, but enough to show his relief. Vader stood behind the seated comm technician, Piet next to him as the tech activated the comm. "Report," Vader ordered as he folded his arms. Rainier cleared her throat before beginning to speak. "Argento is no longer in the abandoned church. She, myself, and 2 of the other Fallen have been brought to an outpost. I'm not entirely sure where it is, but I do know it's close to the industrial district. We're also not the only ones that have been brought here." "Who else was taken?" I believe some of the students from Kuo Academy, judging from their uniforms, as well as some yokai. That's not important right now, though. Palpatine has a way of watching you. I don't know how he does, but perhaps there's a spy or something. No, not a spy. Our ships. They all have back doors for Palpatine to access. They were put in place to ensure none of his warships could be fully used against him. Great. Anyway, from what I've seen, most of the men here are normal soldiers. They've got tactical gear and have guns, but that's it. There are 4 squads of stormtroopers and 1 squad of troopers called Dark Troopers, but I can't get any information about them. All I know is that there was one other squad out when I was brought in. We have them. They tried to capture the Devil Heiresses an hour ago. We're interrogating them as we speak. Tell me of these other fallen. Middlet and Calawarna. Middlet is the weakest of the fallen here in Kuo, and Calawarna is the 3rd strongest. Donasik, our 4th member, is still at the church with other Palpatine-loyal troops. Both Calawarna and Middlet were corrupted, and from what I can tell, so was Donasik. That would leave our stray exorcists as the only ones uncorrupted by Palpatine. Do not be so sure of that. That problem, however, will be dealt with at another time. Who is in command of this outpost? A man named Varneen. Does that name mean anything to you? No, it does not. Is that all? Yes, my lord. Very well. I have new instructions for you. You are to begin preparing for our arrival at the outpost. We have one of their ships in our custody, and it will be a simple matter of retracing its flight path. You are to take control of wherever they are holding Argento and the other prisoners. You will hold that area until we find you. Once that is accomplished, you will bring them all back here. Is that understood, Rainier? Yes, my lord. What am I to do with the prison guards? They are expendable. Do with them what you wish. And my fellow fallen? Leave them to me. I will contact you when I have arrived at the outpost. That will be your signal to strike. As you wish, my lord, Rainier answered, cutting the comm transmission. Piet turned to Vader, his expression concerned. Are you sure this is wise, milord? Those dark troopers she mentioned may be a problem. Explain, Admiral, Vader stated as he lowered his arms and began walking out of the comm room, the excellent Admiral following close behind. Vader noticed that Piet had pulled out a datapad as he walked. From what we were able to gather from our prisoners, their armor has been augmented to allow them a small amount of force powers. Nothing major, of course, but significant enough that they would be problematic for our main troops. We're not sure how this was done. Palpatine was knowledgeable in quite a number of Sith techniques and practices. It would not surprise me if he found a way to do this through that knowledge. I am unconcerned about the Dark Troopers, however. I do not intend to bring our standard troops on this mission. You mean you'll be doing this on your own, milord? No. I will be taking Triton Squad and my personal guard unit. My apprentice will also remain here. He and the devils have gone through enough conflict tonight. Would you like me to inform them so that you can prepare, milord? No, Admiral. I will do that myself. Relay my orders to my guards and Triton Squad. As you wish, milord, Piet replied before splitting away from Vader and heading down. Another hallway. Issei was sitting on a couch, looking down at the lightsaber he'd taken from the corpse of the Dark Jedi he'd killed. Thoughts raced around his head on a variety of topics, but not one focused on the Dark Jedi lightsaber. It was like a taboo topic in his mind. To acknowledge it would force him to confront the fact that he had killed his first person. He was 16 years old, damn it. How was a 16-year-old supposed to comprehend taking a life? Issei, a voice asked into his thoughts, causing his gaze to come off the lightsaber. Rias stood in the doorway, a worried look marring her face. Her arms were folded as her gaze drifted to the lightsaber. It lingered on the captured weapon for only a moment before coming back to meet his eyes. Are you alright? You've been quiet ever since we left the industrial district. Issei pursed his lips before sighing and gently tossing the lightsaber on the glass table in front of him. It made a soft clink and rolled slightly, only stopping when Issei used the force to halt its momentum. He tried to smile at the Grimoire heiress, but it felt more like a frown. Yeah, I'm fine, just, thinking is all. I think I can guess what you were thinking about, Rias said soothingly as her eyes flicked to the lightsaber on the table. Issei gave a mirthless chuckle at that before moving over to let Rias sit. He figured she was going to ask to sit anyway, so why wait for her to ask? He felt the couch shift as Rias sat down, but he'd gone back to staring at the lightsaber. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Does it get easier? Killing? Yeah. In a way, it does. I would say it depends on who or what you're killing at the moment. For example, let's take a stray devil and a human. I have no qualms about killing strays simply because they are monsters. They're dangerous to almost everyone and capturing them is a waste. Once they become a stray, there isn't any going back. I'm guessing that's not the case with humans though, is it? No. To put it simply, humans are far more complicated. Killing a human is far more difficult because they can change. Their emotions, thoughts, and pretty much everything else about them are always in flux. I've found that there is rarely a way to avoid some kind of regret when I'm forced to kill someone. Even the evilest of humans have some spark of inherent good in them. Humans like Vader, for example. I see. Do you think I could have avoided killing the Dark Jedi? As much as it pains me to say it, I don't think you could have. If you'd held back, I doubt you, Sona, or I would be here. Kiba and the others certainly wouldn't be either. I know, but I doubt I'm ever going to stop thinking about that. Thinking of what I could have done better. If you ever feel like you want to talk about it, know that I and the others are open. Thanks. So, what are you going to do with that new blade? The lightsaber? I'm not really sure. I'm sure I'll figure something out. I'm sure you will, a new voice spoke up from the doorway. The two glanced up to see Sona leaning on the doorframe, her arms folded. They saw past her and could see her and Rias's peerage mingling. I was wondering where they were. I'm guessing they were making sure no one was around to see us take out the stray devil. Yes. They heard the shots and started moving as quickly as they could, but you know the industrial district, Sona answered as she came off the doorframe, so what do we know about our assailants? Other than the fact that they work for Palpatine? Not much. Their gear is new. Seems Palpatine decided to improve on the stormtrooper armor. Those sets in particular were disconcerting. Oh. How so? They are utterly bathed in the dark side of the Force. I felt it when they were stripping the troopers. The Force can enchant items. Rias cut in, glancing at Issei in concern. The breathing from a nearby stairway clued them in that Vader was approaching before he answered Rias, indeed, Heiress Grimoire. Vader stepped out, quickly followed by his personal guard of death troopers and a squad of stormtroopers Issei had never seen before. The stormtroopers all had a stylized snarling Wookiee face on their chest plates and dark green lenses. Each was wearing a pauldron, though only the commander and the second-in-command were wearing a different colored pauldron. Their paint scheme was also a deeper shade of blue than the standard 501 STs. Good that you are all here. We need to speak. What about, MSTR? Rainier has reported, my apprentice. The men you faced were one of many teams sent out by an outpost Palpatine has here in Kuo town. I and the men behind me will be taking it. That seems very aggressive, Lord Vader. Why the change in tactics? They have the Nun, as well as others from Kuo Academy. What? Indeed. We cannot stand by and let them be taken to Palpatine. Agreed. What do you want us to do? Nothing. You have been through enough this night. Besides, I doubt you would want to oust yourselves as devils to your fellow students. Am I correct in that assumption? Yes. That means I'm also staying, right? That is correct. You and Admiral Pyatt will be in command while I am away. Have our men put on alert until I return. It will be done, MSTR. Good. I will notify you when I am on my way back. That should give you time to leave, heiresses. You will do the same, Issei, Vader ordered, his usage of Issei's first name telling Issei that his MSTR would take no arguments on this. Issei bowed his head in assent. I will speak with you all tomorrow to go over our next steps. With that, Vader turned and left through the doorway opposite Issei and the devils, toward the hangar. Surveillance Outpost Omicron, Japan. You may begin, Rainier, Vader stated through the comm link. Rainier couldn't stop the evil smile that formed on her face. It was time for a little revenge. Yes, Lord Vader. She shut down the comm link and began her journey back to the holding cells, making sure that she went unnoticed by Palpatine's men and women. A plan began to form in the back of her mind as she walked. It was a simple plan, truth be told, but it would work for this occasion. The door to the cells was up ahead, and no guards were in sight. She pawned the panel like the stormtrooper from earlier had. The door slid up with little sound to the same group of guards and cells full of prisoners. It was time to get to work. Milbrin Drimmock was nursing a cup of coffee when he heard the door in front of him open. He glanced up with a raised eyebrow as he saw a single Fallen enter. He couldn't remember her name, but he believed she was the newest one to be brought over to their side. He shrugged and went back to his coffee as one of his fellow guards went over to figure out what she was doing there. He paid little attention to the conversation, taking a sip from his coffee. He grimaced as he found out too late that the DMN thing was still as hot as Mustafar lava. He could already tell he wouldn't be tasting anything right for the next few days. He swore under his breath as he set the coffee down. Just as he did, he saw a flash of red light and watched in horror as the Fallen gutted his fellow guard. The spear tip punched out the man's back through the armor. The other guards were quick to grab their blasters just as he was leaping toward the alarm SWCH. He was shoved backward as another spear nailed the hand reaching for the SWCH to the wall behind him. He began to scream as he tried to grab the spear with his other hand. And pull it out. Taikan Nagamine was the first of the three remaining guards to get his blaster out of his holster. He didn't even bother shouldering the weapon, firing it one-handed at the traitorous Fallen. The shot wasn't even close. The bolt impacted the far wall and blew a crooked-looking grin into it. Fallen Beach, he yelled as he fired another shot at the Fallen. This shot also went wide and would have hit one of the prisoners had they not ducked at the last second. The Fallen seemed to blur as she sprinted toward him. His eyes registered her as a blur before he was knocked into one of the cells. He righted himself and was about to fire again when a large red hand shot out of the cell and grabbed the blaster. He was then pulled against the bars of the cell by a pair of hands. Before he could do anything else, he felt clawed fingers slice his throat from left to right. His free hand shot to his throat as the chest plate he wore was drenched in his own BLD. The hands holding him against the bars of the cell let go just as the one large hand let go of his blaster. He fell to the ground, turning towards the cell as he did. Yokai had gotten the drop on him while he was focused on the Fallen. He raised the rifle weakly in an attempt at revenge. He heard a noise to his left, saw pale skin and black feathers, and knew no more as the spear in the Fallen's hand skewered his brain through his eye socket. Rainier watched the final threat, a kid no older than 20 or so, glance around the room, realize he was F6 ways from Sunday, toss the blaster at her, and make a dash for the door. He didn't get far as his head was exploded by the blaster he'd just tossed at her, as she swiftly caught it, flipped it around, and fired. She turned the blaster on the screamer and fired again, hitting him in the chest. She glanced down at the gun once before she tossed it away too. She went behind the control console, looking for a way to open the cells. Okay, what in the actual hell is going on, a young woman asked from a cell on her left. Judging from the uniform she was wearing, it was one of the students from Kuo Academy. Rescue operation, Rainier replied as she put her wings away. I got that bit, but who are these guys? Can't really talk at the moment, so please be quiet until I can get the cells open. Lady Rainier? Asia questioned blearily from the cell on her left. Glad to hear you're still alive, Argento. Got it. The cells opened with a resounding clank. The yokai who'd killed the guard she'd thrown at them walked out first. It was an oni, a kitsune, and a monkey yokai. Rainier was somewhat impressed Palpatine's men were able to get their hands on an oni. So when did the Fallen betray their human allies? The oni asked bluntly, glowering down at her. She wasn't a big one, only about 9 feet tall. They didn't. I did a few days ago. Most of the Fallen here in Kuo are being coerced into working with these bastards. Coerced how? The kitsune asked as the first set of humans left their cells. Not really the right person to ask about it. My MSTR, the one who just asked me to free all of you I might add, would be. I'm mostly here for revenge. Revenge for what? The Oni asked, this time glancing at the humans who were slowly becoming more and more shocked at the sight of the yokai. Rainier dropped her disguise, causing those in front of her to jump. For this. What they did to make me work for them has a side effect when it's broken. This is that side effect. Okay then. So how are we going to get out of here? The Kuo Academy girl questioned, picking up the blaster Rainier had tossed. We're not, at least for now. There's still too many of them out there. We're going to hold until my MSTR gets here, which shouldn't be long. So do we wait for explanations about everything later? In short, yes. Now let's start getting this place ready for trouble. Major Ute Varnine marched to the hangar bay, a squadron of stormtroopers behind him, all ready to bring in the Gremory and Citrierises. Varnine was sure he was going to get a promotion for this. Operation Hunter's Moon had been his idea, and so far, there had been no issues in getting any of the targets requested by the Emperor. He'd finally be able to get away from Kuo Town, which he believed was far too entrenched in the supernatural, and move up to one of the outposts near Kyoto or maybe even Tokyo. From there, he could plan another Hunter's Moon and hopefully earn another promotion. He wanted to get to the rank of High Colonel, a lofty enough position without all the DMN paperwork of the even higher up ranks, like Brigadier General. There he could reap the benefits of the eventual takeover of Earth and reconstruction of the Empire without the hassle of working through papers or setting orders or whatever else have you. Report on the shuttle, deck officer, Varnine ordered through his comlink while turning down a hallway. Transport shuttle Inimicus is landing in the hangar as we speak, Major Varnine, the deck officer replied, causing Varnine to grow a smug smile. Excellent. Inform the holding area to prepare 2 cells for our brand new guests. Right away, Major. The final door between Varnine and the hangar slid open just as Inimicus landed. He approached the craft while his men fanned out behind him. He stopped just before the area where the entry ramp would be lowered and waited. He never lost his smile as he waited, rehearsing just what he would say to the 2 devil prizes inside the ship. The ramp lowered as the door leading into the ship's interior opened. Welcome to Omicron, RHRGHK. Varnine was cut off as a trio of death troopers with the 501st pattern emblazoned on their armor shot out of the ship and swiftly killed half of the stormtroopers he'd brought with him. The other half of his stormtrooper squad was killed by a squadron of stormtroopers from the Inimicus. All of the Inimicus stormtroopers, all of which were wearing the old version of stormtrooper armor, were also wearing the paint scheme of the 501st. Once all of his men were dead, both the death troopers and the stormtroopers quickly snapped to attention at the sides of the Inimicus's entry ramp. Varnine felt his feet leave the floor as he reached for the invisible hands around his throat. That was when he heard the breathing. Kopur. Varnine stared in horror as the worst person that any Imperial officer could ever meet stepped out of the shuttle and slowly walked down the steps. He felt tears well up in his terrified eyes as the pressure on his throat grew tighter. The black-gloved hand he knew was the cause of his choking was constricting slowly as the man who just left the shuttle began to speak. "Thank you for your welcome, Major," Darth Vader said calmly as his hand constricted further, "though I doubt I was the one you were expecting." Varneen took one hand away from his throat to begin reaching for the pistol at his side. If he could just get a shot off at Vader, maybe he could. He never finished the thought as Vader clenched his fist, snapping Varneen's neck. The former Sith Lord dropped the now-dead Major Issei Varneen and turned to the door. "Let us go and introduce ourselves. Surveillance Outpost Omicron, Japan, 2012 AD 16 ABY. The alarm came without warning. At first, Trooper Rikako Inatsu thought it was one of the weekly drills. She knew it was real when the flashing red lights turned on in the barracks. She immediately snatched her Type 89 rifle from the side of the table, where it had been leaning. She heard the others in the room do likewise as she bolted for the door and switched her radio to the emergency channel. A frantic voice called out as soon as she switched the channel on. "Report your status. I repeat, all Omicron personnel, report your status. This is Perimeter, what the hell is going on in there?" a voice responded, the sounds of multiple people scrambling in the background. Another voice, even more frantic than the first, shouted over the radio. "F Christ, they killed them all. This is Trooper Rikako Inatsu, coming from the barracks. What's going on?" "Intruders in the hangar," another voice said, the more frantic man she'd heard earlier still shouting incoherently in the background. "They killed Major Varneen and the stormtroopers he brought." "What? Varneen's dead? What about Captain Daigo? She's still alive?" "Yes, I'm still bloody alive." "Who are the intruders? I need details. I didn't get a good look." "Shinji, did you see him? It's F. Vader." Shinji yelled before Rikako heard blaster fire in the background. "Spast, that's all we need. Damn it. I'm initiating the Ember Protocol. You all know what to do." Rikako gave a reluctant affirmative that she hoped hadn't been noticed. She had timed it to coincide with one of the others on the radio. She could hear the other troopers who'd been in the barracks coming up behind her, some of whom were pulling back the charging handles on their own Type 89s. She rounded the corner going slightly too fast, causing her to nearly trip. She quickly recovered as she saw the hangar bay door in sight. She knew she had to get everyone into a good defensive posture to slow Vader down while the Ember Protocol proceeded. He couldn't be allowed to stop it. "All right, hold here, hold here. We need to buy time, people. Find some cover and get ready." She never finished as the hangar bay door was ripped apart in front of her. There was no time for plans. She only had time to react. She brought her rifle up and, in a panic, jerked the trigger. The 6 rounds that left her rifle were thankfully on target. The problem was that they were going to hit the wrong spot. The bullets were going to hit just above the right side of his belt. Vader held up a single hand and to her horror, she saw all her bullets stop. She could see more black forms coming up behind Vader alongside slightly shorter white forms. They resolved themselves easily when they stepped into the corridor. 3 tall, black-armored soldiers and a squadron of 10 old-style stormtroopers took up positions around the destroyed hangar door. She went to run and find cover but found herself held in place. Vader was holding not only her fired rounds, but also her. She heard someone behind her fire their own Type 89 while watching the Emperor's former enforcer approach. His red-bladed lightsaber was held out to the side as he kept that one hand raised. The men behind Vader followed after him, opening fire on the other troops that had been behind her. When Vader passed the bullets, they dropped to the floor without preamble. She heard her friends and co-workers die behind her as Vader approached. She trembled and shut her eyes, waiting for the inevitable pain of a stab or her windpipe being crushed. She heard Vader come closer and closer. Her eyes shot open as soon as she heard the former Sith pass by her without so much as a glance. She felt herself able to move again and for only a second thought about turning to shoot. Weighing her odds of survival with trying that versus surrendering, she chose to surrender. As she felt the rifle slip from her fingers, she turned back toward the destroyed hangar door and realized she was never going to have a choice between death and surrender. The stun blast from the stormtrooper standing in front of her saw to that. She fell backward and felt her head connect with the floor. As she lost consciousness, she felt someone pulling her into the hangar before blacking out completely. Vader's lightsaber hummed quietly as he stalked through the halls of the outpost. He could feel the outpost's personnel scrambling around, half in panic and the other half in fear. He wasn't surprised by the reaction. He knew these people had detailed files on himself at the very least. He was alone for the time being, Triton Squad and his Death Trooper Guard tackling their own objectives. He had planned for a three-pronged attack once they were inside the outpost. He would take the brunt of the forces inside while Triton Squad took the left side of the outpost and his Death Troopers the right. For members of Triton Squad had been left behind in the hangar to prevent escape and watch any prisoners that might be taken. He stopped as he felt a group of presences form up at the end of the hallway. He could feel the taint of the dark side coming off of them, denoting them as Palpatine's Dark Troopers. He reared his lightsaber back before casting it forward, the blade spinning away as the first Dark Trooper came around to attack. The trooper's head fell from their shoulders as the blade of the lightsaber went through their neck. The lightsaber continued forward unimpeded, and Vader heard a cry of agony as the saber passed the start of the end hallway. The blade quickly returned to his outstretched hands as 4 troopers began firing from behind cover. Another 3 advanced in between the line of blaster fire. The former Sith Lord began redirecting the shots as he glimpsed a form with an orange pauldron fall flat. The Dark Trooper commander's visor was gone from his helmet, replaced with an already cooling lightsaber/mark. That trooper had been the second person the saber had hit. The 3 advancing troopers tried to dodge and weave out of the way of the redirected bolts. One had been successful in dodging the shots and opened up on Vader. The second had taken 2 bolts with one going to their right kneecap. The other bolt struck the trooper's left shoulder. The trooper was having difficulty grabbing their own blaster from its holster as he laid on the ground, his blasted knee unable to give the man the ability to stand. The final trooper lay dead on the floor as the shot Vader had deflected at that trooper had gone through the neck. Vader, engrossed with deflecting the shots of the squad in front of him, didn't notice the 2 troopers who'd been sneaking up behind him until one of the troopers put the former Sith into a chokehold. Vader immediately used the Force to spin his lightsaber into a blur, much like the blades on Inquisitor lightsabers, as the other trooper came into view. The trooper immediately aimed at the control box on Vader's chest. Vader yanked the blaster out of the trooper's hand before violently tossing him into the opposite wall with the Force. With that threat dealt with for now, Vader quickly reached back and grabbed the head of the trooper trying to choke him. The man started screaming as Vader heard the helmet in his hands begin to crack. The former Sith let go as soon as he felt the arms around his neck and head go limp. He didn't look back at the corpse as he lifted the dazed and disarmed trooper in front of him into the air. He threw the trooper at their comrades at terminal velocity, instantly killing the final advancing trooper as the 2 collided. Vader then went on the offensive. He recalled his lightsaber and began his own advance, first stopping at the struggling trooper. He yanked the man to his feet and positioned the trooper in front of himself. The shots didn't slacken as the man struggled in Vader's grip. 7 shots struck the man simultaneously, killing him. Vader didn't care as he got close enough to the other troopers to risk a crossfire. He discarded his human shield and swept his blade through the midsection of the trooper on his right, pulling the blasters out of the hands of the troopers behind him with the Force. He heard them scrambling behind him as he plunged his blade through the helmet of the second trooper. With both of the troopers who'd covered the right side dead, Vader swung back toward the disarmed troopers. One trooper was dead on the floor. There was no BLD or visible sign of injury, but it was clear to the former Sith that the final Dark Trooper had killed their comrade. The final trooper was on his knees before Vader, his hands behind his head and helmet on the floor. The trooper's face was blank. No words needed to be said between the trooper and the former Sith. Vader simply gestured his blade towards the hangar. The trooper nodded, stood up, made no moves toward his blaster or his helmet, and began his trek to the hangar. Vader watched the trooper go, feeling as though he and that trooper had met somewhere before. Perhaps he'd been one of the thousands of stormtroopers he'd commanded when he was still the Emperor's SLV? It was a question for another time as Vader began his own journey to the holding area. Argento and any other prisoners were the main objective of the operation, after all. Lieutenant, formerly Sergeant, Fox kept an eye on the hangar entrance with CT 91834-65, Pincushion, CT 61653, Shiriwook, and CT 1004-26987, DC. Despite being the only Triton squad members inside the hangar, they held it easily. This wasn't surprising to the 4 clones given the quality of Palpatine's troops. While the stormtroopers during the height of the Galactic Empire were nowhere near as skilled as the clones, they were a whole hell of a lot better than the troops Palpatine employed now. It was so stark a difference that the clones had wondered if they'd been fighting battle droids rather than human beings. The girl still out? Pincushion asked from atop a crate he sat on, his T-21 repeating blaster leaning against said crate. Shiriwook glanced at the woman lying beside one of the ship's landing struts. With a small wind-up, he gently kicked her side. There was no reaction. Yep. Fox rolled his eyes under his helmet before glancing down the hull. It was still mostly cluttered with bodies, some more recent than others. A pair of squads had tried to take back the hangar an hour previously to no avail. Most were killed in the assault while a few survivors retreated down the hall they'd come from. He wouldn't be surprised if they were still back there somewhere. He let out a sigh as he turned his gaze back to the inner hangar. Wonder when the next strike'll come. DC stated quietly as he checked the power pack on his DLT-20A rifle for the 20th time. It was a pretty bad habit he'd picked up during the Clone Wars, and it annoyed Fox. It wasn't so annoying that it distracted Fox, but it annoyed him in that if DC was caught during a check it meant one less blaster in a fight. Pretty sure your ammo is good, DC, Fox commented casually, glancing down at the trooper in question. DC looked up while reinserting his power pack, evidently seeing through Fox's casual comment. Sorry sir. I just get nervous on these kinds of assignments. I know, but at the same time, what happens when another attack happens, and your power pack isn't in your blaster? One more blaster might make all the difference. Yeah, right. We're the second best unit in this place. I have a feeling the bad guys would be strong-pressed to kill at least one of us. What about one of those fallen? We know they're here, and it took Hyodio and a squad of shadow troopers to take one of them down. We may be the best squad of stormtroopers Lord Vader has, but at the end of the day, we're still just normal stormtroopers. I'm sure we can take one. The one we've got doesn't seem that tough. Looks can be deceiving. You of all POP dash. Heads up, we've got incoming, Pincushion stated quickly, hopping off the crate and taking aim at the approaching figure. Fox and DC did the same as they trained their weapons down the hall. Fox scanned the area behind the man before focusing more closely on him. The man was quite obviously one of Palpatine's dark troopers, minus his weapon and helmet. The man's hands were behind his head and his face was utterly blank. Suffice to say, it creeped Fox out. DC leveled his rifle at the man's chest before issuing orders to the man, stop right there. You will turn around and approach slowly or you will be shot. Nod if you understand. The man nodded and did as he was instructed. Fox pulled out his binders and had his hand out toward the man's hands as the man closed the distance. As soon as he was within reach, the binders were snapped onto the man's wrists. Fox then dragged the man back toward Shrywook, his E-11B rifle placed squarely in the middle of the man's back. Keep an eye on him. He tries anything, blast him. Yes sir. Want me to notify command? Negative, I'll do it. CT 91834-65 get over here and help keep an eye on our new prisoner. CT 1004-269/87 keep scanning the hull. Open fire on anything that tries to get in here that isn't our squad, Lord Vader, or his guards. Yes sir. Fox began ascending the ship's steps as soon as he was finished issuing his orders. He found the comm console quickly, having used it before to inform Pyatt of their first prisoner. After ensuring the ship's encryption still held, he called their home. A short conversation about the operation and the new prisoner later, and Fox was outside again. Any new orders? Pincushion asked as Fox descended the ship's ramp. Negative. We're to continue holding the hangar unless ordered to do otherwise by Commander Apo or Lord Vader. Did you mean to leave out our third-in-command on purpose, Lieutenant? You forget how he and his kind operate. He won't deign to request backup from us normal troopers. Besides, I'm quite sure they can handle themselves. They are special forces after all. Aren't we past that now though, sir? Habits are strong to break, Corporal. Especially for Death Troopers. VF G11, leader of Lord Vader's Death Trooper Guard and formerly designated DT V11, crept toward the open doorway on his right. VF G12 and VF G13 were right behind him with weapons held at a low-ready position. They all carried their standard E-11D carbines with stocks collapsed as they were in tight quarters. VF G11 kept an eye on the motion tracker in his HUD while the other focused on the doorway. G11 held up a hand and came to a halt just before the door. G12, cover the corridor. G13, you're with me. I'll take the left, you take the right. As soon as I give the signal, we make entry and check for hostiles. Clear. Clear sir, his fellow death troopers answered. G12 brought his carbine up in a high-ready position while G13 and himself closed in on the doorway. He took his position at the door, his carbine held across his torso with the barrel pointed at the ground. G13 trapped her carbine stock under her armpit while pulling out a flash grenade. G11 held up 3 fingers and counted down. As his countdown reached 1, she primed the flash and tossed it inside before hitting the other side of the door. A muted whomp sounded inside, muted even further by the troopers' helmets. A trio of blasters opened fire at them, accurate enough for the 2 Death Troopers to know that the flash grenade had been useless. G11 glanced at the motion tracker in his HUD. The hostiles inside were content to keep their positions for the time being. G13, keep them busy while I try and find a way behind them, he ordered, unconcerned if the hostiles inside heard him. There wasn't a need for concern since all they would hear would be garbled nonsense. His fellow death trooper nodded before edging as close to the open door as she could and not exposing herself. The barrel of her carbine was just barely past the doorframe as she opened up on the room's occupants. G11 moved as soon as his fellow death trooper fired into the room. His motion tracker had mapped out a second opening in the room down the corridor. G12 opened fire at something down the corridor, and G11's MFTAS brightened in response to the blaster fire. He caught a glimpse of a white armored being as it ducked into a doorway down the hall. They would deal with that room later as he got closer to the second entrance. His motion tracker pinged as new movement appeared. Someone or something was moving toward the second door. He raised his carbine in anticipation of the enemy he knew was going to appear. His carbine was lined up on where the head would be if someone was coming out. When one of Palpatine's new stormtroopers came out, he got 3 consecutive shots. The stormtrooper's helmet was blasted apart instantly. The headless body collapsed as G11 reached the left side of the doorframe. Making sure no one else was sneaking up on him inside the room, he dashed in. In another life the room would have been a quaint office cafeteria, much like the one at their home near the outskirts of Kuo Town. That ceased to be the case the moment the outpost had been invaded by their little group. A metallic self-service kitchen counter was providing cover for 2 stormtroopers and a black uniformed officer. G11 couldn't make out the rank plaque from where he was. He did see the still form of a 3rd stormtrooper, a pair of scorch marks visible on the center of the trooper's chest plate with another mark in the center of the trooper's visor. The death trooper took careful aim at the officer, who looked scared out her mind. He began to squeeze the trigger on his carbine as the officer fumbled with something in her BRST pocket. She had just managed to pull out a small object when his trigger broke, and a bolt lanced out from his carbine. The bolt passed cleanly through the side of her upper chest and impacted the wall on the opposite side. The shot drew the attention of both stormtroopers. One of the troopers turned their weapon on him while the other kept G13 suppressed. G11 was already moving when the trooper began firing. Being a death trooper came with many perks, one of which was genetic augmentation. G11 had always believed he was fast before the genetic augments. His speed had been increased to the point that many non-death troopers saw only a blur when he sprinted. He wasn't going that fast at this particular moment, but it was enough to throw the trooper's aim off. The stormtrooper's blaster barked and a bolt grazed the death trooper's pauldron. Had G11 been a moment slower he'd be dead, but he didn't care. Being a death trooper made him disregard those risks. This was also helped by his and his squad's time as Lord Vader's personal guard. He returned fire and struck the trooper in the side. The stormtrooper fell with a grunt, his own blaster falling from his hands as he went to grasp at the wound. When G11 reached the final trooper, the trooper had turned enough to get his weapon within striking distance. It was a miraculous thing when the trooper knocked the death trooper's blaster carbine out of his hand. It was a very short-lived victory, however. G11 instantly struck the stormtrooper with a powerful jab to the trooper's sternum. The trooper, having had the wind knocked out of him by the jab, was unprepared for the hands that wrapped around their throat and blaster hand. The death trooper squad leader squeezed as strong as he could, tightening his already vice-like grip on the stormtrooper's throat. The stormtrooper's blaster fired impotently into the ceiling while their other hand latched onto the hand choking them. Without a word, G11 snapped the trooper's neck by slamming them into the edge of the kitchen counter. He glanced down at the trooper he shot in the side when he let go of the broken trooper he'd been holding. A small kick to the arm closest to the wound forced the wounded trooper onto his back. Not willing to leave a wounded enemy at his back, G11 grabbed a fallen blaster and pointed it at the trooper's chest. A pair of bolts ended the trooper's suffering. The death trooper was just about to toss the blaster away when it dawned on him that the blaster wasn't a standard E11. It definitely took design cues from one, but it was certainly not one. He decided to bring it back for study as he put it in his E11D's holster. Once that was accomplished, he retrieved his E11D before calling out to his squad mates. All hostiles have been dealt with in here. How is it out there? I know there was one near the end of the corridor. Taken care of, sir, G12 responded as G13 moved past the open door. He began moving towards the door, his gaze never moving even as he felt his boot connect with the officer's arm. He never saw the rosary that was revealed in the officer's open palm as he left the room and rejoined his squad. Commander CC 1119, Apo, ducked back as a blaster bolt blew a chunk out of the hallway wall he was taking cover behind. He glanced backward to check on 2 of his men. They'd both been hit in the ambush that he'd walked them into stupidly. DMN his old age. CT 83-399, Copper, and CT 77263-14, Not, had rounded the corner of the hallway that he was now using as cover and took around 6 blasts. Copper had taken the brunt of the bolts. Apo already knew the trooper was dead as Copper had taken 4 of the shots to his chest plate. Not had been marginally luckier. The pair of bolts that had hit him had tagged his kneecap and skated off the top of his helmet when he'd fallen. Had his fall been slower, Apo would have 2 dead brothers rather than 1. Apo called back once he was finished checking his casualties. Granite, get up here. CT 091774/881, Granite, was the squad's demolition specialist, and Apo could already see him digging in the backpack full of explosives. Therm dets, sir. Granite asked as he pulled a pair of standard issue N20 baradium core thermal detonator from the backpack. His backpack was full of those, but Apo knew he also had a few other types for special occasions. Got any Class A dets? Only one, sir. You want me to toss it, or do you want to? I'm not sure where they are just yet, but be ready to hand me it when I look out. Wadash, Granite was pushed aside as Apo leveled his TL-50 at the man who'd appeared at the lip of the corner opposite himself. The man had had his rifle up and ready to shoot when Apo's burst nearly tore him in half. The fire from down the hallway seemed to double and forced the 2 clones to flinch back from the corner. Fearfeck, I didn't want to waste one of our flash grenades so soon. Hand me one, then get ready to toss your therm detective. Yes, sir. The flash bomb was quickly handed over and just as quickly armed and tossed at their attackers. It took 2 seconds for the bomb to go off and then 1 more for the Class A thermal detonator to sail down the hallway and at the trio of swearing forms. At the 5-second mark, Granite had ducked back into their corner. The hallway shook from the detonation and it was several seconds more before Apo peeked out of his cover. The end of the hall was a mess. Part of the ceiling had collapsed onto one of the bodies and a fire had started. Apo heard a click before he saw water start pouring from the rest of the hallway's ceiling. The fire was quickly doused and the floor became very slick. He could see the other 2 bodies clearly. One had been flung backward by the explosion, and from what he could see, the man was clearly dead. The final man was barely alive and unable to fight. Apo nodded to himself and motioned for his squad members who were still up to start moving. He turned back to the squad's medic, Chorich, or CT 4481-33 if one wanted to be formal. Get Knot and Copper back to the hangar. Link back up with us when and if you can, clear. Chorich nodded and helped Knot get up. The medic and wounded trooper grabbed onto Copper and began to drag the dead trooper back to the hangar. Apo shook his head sadly before turning to join the rest of the squad. They still had to find the detention area after all. Thankfully, Palpatine and those who served him copied the original Empire's designs for military installations. The cells should be near the center of the outpost. Apo just hoped he wouldn't lose more of Triton's squad before they found them. SC-99471 directed the few remaining defenders in this particular section of Omicron to take positions. They were meant to hold whoever was coming for them at bay for however long they could. He didn't give them great odds of surviving for long. When he'd been younger, he worked right alongside the 501st during the Manayan Uprising as part of Manayan's local stormtrooper garrison. He'd seen firsthand just what they were capable of. Sure, it had been against the rebellion, but the opposition wasn't just any old members of the rebellion. The units his garrison, and the 501st had been sent to deal with were members of Spec Force. Most of SC-99471's garrison had been killed before the battle really got started. His men had just barely been able to hold back the rebels before Vader and the 501st had arrived. Within a span of 4 hours, the rebels had been pushed back to the outskirts of Otto City. The rebels had then entrenched themselves in the city's outskirts as they couldn't retreat further. Any further retreats would place them in the water. SC-99471 could still remember the brutal fighting there even now. Now, however, rather than being on the winning side, he was playing the part of the besieged Spec Force operative. He hoped and prayed that none of Vader's men in Omicron found them. If they had that luck, then it would be possible to escape. There was no point in staying to complete the Ember Protocol, after all. The Ember Protocol, that directive was always a fool's errand. It was meant as a way to deny as much sensitive data to the enemy as possible. It was designed to work against devils, angels, fallen, and any other supernatural or natural foe Earth had to throw at them. Against foes that were from their home galaxy, like Vader and the 501st, it was useless. The protocol had been adapted from the old Empire's Cinder protocol. Vader at the very least would be able to counteract the data erasure easily. SC-99,471's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of one of the cell block guards. Strange that one of them would be out here and not taking care of the prisoners. Something wrong, trooper. Sir, we haven't been able to get inside the detention area. It's all locked down. We put in our clearance codes and it still wouldn't open up. Someone's overriding our attempts at entry, the guard explained frantically as he gestured back at the cell block. Vader's people couldn't have gotten there already, SC-94471 thought before he replied, damn it. You five, with me. We'll sort this out. You stay here and take a position. You need to buy us as much time as possible to dispose of the prisoners. Yes sir. SC-94471 was already moving toward the cells as the guard found a place in the hastily assembled line. The others of his team were a technician, a veteran of the old Imperial Army, 2 local recruits, and another stormtrooper. The other trooper and himself had been the only stormtroopers to arrive and set up the defense. SC-94471 was the ranking trooper between them, being a sergeant first class. It was strong getting promotions on a relatively peaceful post like Manayan. He'd only made sergeant because of the uprising after all. As the team of 6 continued toward the detention area, the lights flickered and died. The emergency lights switched on a few seconds later. SC-94471 couldn't help but feel a little creeped out by the change in light. He'd read too many horror stories growing up and now he couldn't help but be on edge whenever creepy SHT happened. The lights going out and being replaced by the emergency lights was near the top of his do not like list. The hells happened to the lights? One of the locals asked as the team picked up the pace. SC-94471 considered answering him before the technician opened her mouth. Vader, or one of his guys must have taken the power out. How the hell are they moving so fast? Varneen wasn't exactly an original guy, the army veteran pointed out dryly. Omicron is a carbon copy of most Imperial installations in the home galaxy. You'll find most of our veteran officer corps to share that line of thinking. The other stormtrooper spoke up after the army veteran's comment. Careful, Trooper Urun. That's dangerously close to defeatist talk. Anyone else notice that we're alone here? One of the locals spoke up as he raised the slug thrower he'd been holding. SC-94471 thought that particular version of slug thrower was called a Type 64. The other local did much the same, raising her smaller slug thrower. SC-94471 couldn't recall what that one was called. Now that you mention it. Would you all knock it off? I've already got a bad feeling about this, I don't need you all making it worse. Not sure we could make it any worse. One of the team muttered. SC-94471 still caught it, however. You DMN well know what I meant. So all of you pipe down until we get to the detention area, eh? He didn't get any replies from the team. They at least stopped talking, which helped his nerves. The 6 of them arrived at the detention area after a 10-minute trek. SC-94471 set the technician to work immediately. Just as the technician got to work on the door override controls, SC-94471's comlink came alive. KZZTZK killing us KZZTZZK need im KZT sitten TZK Vader. SC-94471's BLD ran cold. Vader's assault on the hastily created defensive line was swift, brutal, and utterly inescapable. None of the defenders surrendered. It was a bloodbath. The former Sith stepped over the body of one who'd been speaking into a comlink when he'd gotten to them. His lightsaber hummed as he walked toward the detention area, his breathing the only other sound. He could sense 6 beings up ahead. None were the corrupted fallen angels. He hadn't encountered any of the ones Rainier had reported were here. Had they left before the assault began? If they had, they would most likely retreat to the abandoned church. The church would be more of a challenge for his men. He wasn't foolish enough to believe for a second that the church didn't have any kind of supernatural defenses besides the priests and fallen. Gremory would most likely have a way to counteract them. Perhaps she'd be willing to explain how to get past them, since he knew she wouldn't be able to directly attack the fallen, as it would risk the three-way war starting up again. More beings were approaching rapidly from behind. Vader would need to deal with them too, since he already knew they were more of Palpatine's men. Slowing them down would help him prepare Rainier and the prisoners she'd freed for them. Using the Force, he ripped the ceiling of the hallway behind him down and crushed the door controls to a pair of large rooms on both sides of the hall. They could enter one way, but they'd need to blow the second door open to get through. Vader never slowed down at all as he continued that pattern, repeating it 4 times. The former Sith stopped after the 4th as he was now close enough to the cells. He turned the corner and looked upon the horrified faces of 4 out of 6 people. The other 2 were stormtroopers and thus wearing helmets, but he could tell they were equally terrified. The 6 of them had been trying to get inside the detention area. One of the helmeted troopers backed up against the door. He was shaking his head as the others raised their weapons on the former Sith, save for the one crouched next to the door control panel. "Open fire," the second stormtrooper shouted out, kicking off another skirmish. Vader wasted no time and deflected the bolt before using the Force to yank the attackers' weapons out of their hands. The stormtrooper leapt at him, a knife in his outstretched hand. Vader seized the man with the Force and pinned him to the ceiling. The stormtrooper didn't live long past that as he was cut in 2 by Vader's lightsaber. The 2 halves of the body dropped behind Vader as he advanced toward a Japanese man who'd scrambled for the blaster the stormtrooper lost. A quick downward slash solved that problem. The man's head fell from his shoulders as his body fell atop the blaster. "Saizo," the woman cried, reaching for the dead man. Vader allowed her to pass him and stood before the older man. The older man's look of horror had morphed into one of defiance. He stood still as the former Sith came to a stop before him. The man spat to the side before speaking. "I won't surrender, traitor. I expected as much. I will make your end quick, trooper Urun." Vader replied, recognizing the older man as one of the army infantrymen from the subjugation of Megiddo. Vader always remembered those who had impressed him, even to the smallest degree. Urun smiled slightly at that, before closing his eyes. Vader ran his blade through the veteran's heart and was about to turn to the last 2 when he heard the telltale squeak of a blaster being scraped against the ground. Without looking back, Vader raised a hand and the woman who'd started pulling the blaster out from under Saizo's corpse grasped at her throat. She was lifted into the air as Vader choked her through the Force. A moment later, he clenched his fist and snapped the woman's neck. "Move away from the panel," Vader ordered as he let go of the woman's corpse. The one man, more a teen really, near the panel quickly jumped up and ran away from the panel and next to the stormtrooper, who was still shaking his head. Vader nodded to himself before using the Force to push the 2 into the wall behind them. He didn't kill them, as both were unarmed and unwilling to fight from what the Force told them. The 2 slumped to the floor unconscious. "You may open the door, Rainier," Vader said mildly, deactivating his lightsaber and hooking it into place on his belt. The door hissed open quietly. Rainier stood behind the control console with Argento at her side. A group of 9 others were behind her, 3 of which were armed with blasters. It wasn't strong to tell where they'd got them from the 3 bodies in the room. Vader studied the group before using the Force to grab his 2 prisoners and place them in the nearest cell. He then activated the door to that cell with the Force while approaching the freed captives. "I'm sure you all have questions. Questions that will be answered later. More guards are coming. Can I count on you to help me fight them?" Rainier came around the console with a smirk. Vader knew she wouldn't miss out on a chance to have her revenge. He didn't blame her for wanting that. A young Kuo Academy student holding onto one of the blasters stepped forward, then the large red being, until only Argento and a young man with a monkey-like tail were all that remained where they were. Very well. You six will need weapons. These should suffice, Vader began, using the Force to retrieve the weapons of the six-man team. Take positions around the console and cells. You two will be my backup. Rainier, you will be fighting alongside me. We must keep them out of this room. Yes, my lord, Rainier replied as soon as he finished speaking, summoning her spears of light. The large red being narrowed her eyes. Why should we care if they get inside? Because they will surely kill you. You are witnesses to this disaster. The leader of these soldiers does not like such things. You will all be executed by them for simply being here. I imagine you would wish to live rather than be killed. The boy with fox ears and tail narrowed his eyes before growling. Well duh. What gave it away? Good. I advise you keep that fire inside you lit. You will need it for what is to come. After tonight, your lives will never be the same again. I got that, the Kuo student stated dryly, looking at the non-human prisoners. Take your positions, quickly. They will be here soon. Captain Miyu Daigo led 2 squadrons of security personnel that she'd managed to cobble together toward the detention area. It had originally been 5 squads, but the other 3 had been destroyed on the way. 1 squad were taken out by a squadron of old-style stormtroopers with pauldrons, dark green lenses, and furry monster-like faces painted on their blue-striped armor. The other 2 squads to be destroyed was done so by a trio of honest-to-God death troopers. Daigo was certain the death troopers had been wiped out when BYSS had been destroyed. Given the blue markings on these particular death troopers, it wasn't strong for her to figure out who they belonged to. So far she'd been lucky to have avoided Vader. Daigo pulled out her comlink. This was another important part of the Ember Protocol. Attention all units, this is Captain Daigo. To those of you who haven't retreated to the abandoned church or aren't dead, take out as many of Vader's men as possible. We cannot allow him to leave here with his men intact. Know that your service will be commended. Long live the Empire. Daigo didn't wait for replies as she shut down the comlink channel. She checked her RK-3's power pack and prayed her good fortune wouldn't break as she led her men to the detention area. She knew her good luck had ended when they came across the first collapsed ceiling and the bodies. It took an hour to get through all of the collapsed ceilings. Her heart sank when she finally laid eyes upon the cells. There, standing before them, was Darth Vader. She was behind the squadrons and didn't get a good look, but it was enough. Her mouth became as dry as a desert when the slaughter began. She watched in mounting horror as Vader, the fallen angel Rainier, and the prisoners they'd taken tore her men apart. She decided then and there that she wouldn't let them reach her. Daigo placed the barrel of her RK-3 against her temple just as Rainier gutted. Her second in command. Her comlink came on as she did this. She heard the shouts for reinforcements and knew, deep down, that none would be coming. Vader had taken down an outpost of 100 with 10 stormtroopers, 3 death troopers, and himself alone. The traitor had already won. Omicron was lost. She pulled the trigger on her pistol when the former Sith turned his blade on her. In her brain's dying moments, which seemed to feel like hours, she had to wonder how everything had gone wrong. Then it came to her. She and the rest of Omicron had tried to fight the force of nature that was Darth Vader. They paid for it with their lives. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for more crossovers. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Bobby F397 on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.